Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and recently we've been taking a much closer look at the upcoming hero talents in the War Within Alpha. So far, we've taken a pretty deep look at mages, warriors, demon hunters, and the fun choices available for the class of Death Knight. And recently, I've been spending a little bit more time exploring the class of Warlock. And ever since last week or so when Affliction got some new talent adjustments, I started to take a look at Warlocks a little bit more carefully, starting with Affliction, and was immediately hooked at the gameplay loop that the Hellcaller hero Spec offered, as well as what Diabolist Warlock was doing for Demonology. And with me now starting to log some more runs over in the alpha, I started to see a little bit more data as well as the damage spread and the changes that come with some of these hero spec in a much deeper overview. So for today's video, I want to take a much closer look at the hero specs available for the class of Warlock, going over every single one of their individual talents and how they affect each spec's gameplay, but also look at some of the thematic elements of the hero specs as well and what they will end up doing for the class of Warlock. If you guys are interested in more class coverage and hero specs in the future for War Within Alpha, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So the order in which I'm going to go over all of the Warlocks hero specs will go from the ones that I enjoyed the most to the ones that I enjoyed the least. However, I kind of liked all of them, though I did find the last hero spec that we'll talk about a little bit more passive and a bit of a mixed bag depending on the spec. So, off the bat, let's go over the Diabolist. The Diabolist is a powerful warlock that's able to command some of the strongest demons available, demons that have been kind of unbound and fled all over the place since the defeat of the Burning Legion, and Demonology warlocks as well as Destruction warlocks, the two that possess the most amount of power behind their casts. Both of them are able to tame these uncontrollable forces and summon them from the twisting nether into the battlefield. And off the bat, the main ability for Diabolist is going to be Diabolic Ritual. While Diabolic Ritual is active, each soul shard you spend reduces its duration by 1 second, and this is adjusted for Destruction and Demonology since both of them spend and build soul shards very differently. When a Diabolic Ritual expires, you gain Demonic Art, causing the next soul shard ability to summon an Overlord, a Mother of Chaos, or a Pit Lord that unleashes a devastating attack against your foes. And the rotation of demons usually goes from an Overlord exactly into the Mother of Chaos, into a Pit Lord, then back into Overlord, and it ends up being a little bit more predictable of a setup. To show off all of these demons, the Overlord kind of leaps at the foe, cleaving everybody down for a ton of damage, and also puts a debuff on the enemy called Cloven Soul, which makes the enemy take 5% more damage from your pets and abilities. And when you get Mother of Chaos after using a Soul Shard spender, you summon a Mother of Chaos, which is like a big old Shivara that ends up blasting the target for a bunch of damage, and your next Shadow Bolt or Incinerate becomes an Inferno Bolt, dealing a ton of damage, scaling off of those Shadow Bolts and Incinerates, but also generating you lots of resources. Your final one is going to be a Pit Lord, which is going to transform your Hand of Gul'dan or your Chaos Bolt into a Ruination, a more powerful version of the ability that's also going to summon a couple of Fell Imps if you're a spec of Demonology. And that's essentially the main gameplay loop of Diabolist, spending and building soul shards, summoning these demons, and then slightly adjusting rotation depending on these demons. From there on, we have a bunch of other talents that can impact gameplay, from Touch of Rancora, which is going to buff your next soul shard spending ability that's going to summon up one of these greater demons, increasing its damage by 100% and reducing its cast time by 50%. Further down, we have other choices such as Flames of Zoroth, where fire damage is being increased by 2% and the damage dealt by demons is also increased by 2%. Abyssal Domination is going to work a little bit different depending on your spec. For Demonology is going to reduce the cooldown of your summon Felguard, the Grimoire Felguard, by 30 seconds and increases duration by 3 seconds. Though for Destruction Warlocks, this ability is a little bit different, as it instead makes you kind of like a Demonology Warlock-esque type of spec, where Cataclysm now summons an Overfiend that casts 2 Chaos Bolts that hit at 80% overall effectiveness, which allows Destruction Warlock to feel closer to Demonology with this new demon that only they can now summon. Then we have Gloom of Nathreza, where enemies marked by Havoc take 5% increased damage from your single target spells. But for Demonology, it makes Hand of Gul'dan deal additional damage for each soul shard spent. Besides this, we also have a couple of choice nodes between Soul Edge Circles, where you always gain the benefits of Soul Burn whenever you use Demonic Circle Teleport, or Annihilant's Bellow, where Howl of Terror cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds and its range is slightly increased. We also have another choice node between Cruelty of Kirkson, where summoning Demonic Tyrant or Infernal grants Diabolic Ritual and reduces its duration by 3 seconds. Or Infernal Machine, where Soul Shard spending abilities decrease the duration of Diabolic Ritual by 1 second while your Demonic Tyrant or Infernal is currently active. Another choice node is more defensive with Infernal Vitality, where Unending Resolve will heal you for 30% of your maximum health over 10 seconds. Or Infernal Bulwark, where Unending Resolve grants you Soul Leech equal to 10% of your maximum health, and increases the maximum amount of Soul Leech you can absorb by 10% for 8 seconds. Now, when it comes to gameplay, the Diabolist for Demonology works super flawlessly. It fits it like a glove, and it makes it feel like it's part of the Demonology identity. Because Great 2 Demons, for the most part, are awesome, and Demonology is focused around summoning demons as often as possible. These demons are fantastic for Demonology because they grant you better Soul Shard generation or more efficient Soul Shard spending, and allows for a 1.5 minute cooldown on your Grimoire Felguard, which makes it a much better burst cooldown. Rotationally, Demonology also has a very good flow when played by Diabolist, and it feels like a very passive addition with small rotational adjustments depending on the greater demon that you get. Overall, it's a very predictable playstyle, but it's a fun gameplay loop for you to interact with. It feels passive, but it feels also engaging at the same time. But Diabolist for Destruction is a little bit different, as it makes you feel kind of like a Demonology Warlock in a way, as you can summon a brand new demon that casts Chaos Bolts, which I think adds quite a lot of flavor to the Diabolist specifically. The Greater Demons have also much more of an impact and a setup type of playstyle involved when it comes to Destruction and the Diabolist hero spec. Like Mother of Chaos, for example, buffs all of your Incinerate damage with that Infernal Bolt. However, Incinerate has a lot of different talents that it can synergize with that can amplify its damage even further. And you can utilize a bunch of these talents together to set up for a fantastic go with the Infernal Bolt ability. The same thing can be said about the Pinlord and Ruination, which replaces your Chaos Bolt ability, causing it to deal 1.5 million damage. And Ruination even summons a Diabolic Imp to help you in combat, which goes back into that feeling of your Destruction Warlock with some hints of Demonology as part of your playstyle. Either way, it's a very satisfying playstyle, but for Demonology in particular, it's more passive, though for Destruction, there's going to be some synergy with how you want to line up your big Chaos Bolts goes, your big Incinerate goes, but playing around these greater demons for Destruction in particular, I think is a good thing, especially since Destruction's basic rotation is generally quite simple, so adding some new little hoops for you to jump through playing Diabolist feels actually really fun to play with, and the damage payoff is more than enough. Now that we get done with Diabolist, let's go over the Hellcaller, which are inspired by Satyrs of Azeroth. Hellcallers in particular, which are the most feared kind that weave together vilest shadow magic with entropic Fellfire at the cost of corrupting their own soul. And that's essentially what Hellcallers do. They corrupt the very soul of their enemy with the ability called Wither, which replaces corruption for affliction or immolation for destruction. Wither on its own merit is an insanely strong damage over time ability, actually the strongest dot effect in the game by far, especially when you compare it against every other damage over time effect that's available. In terms of its tooltip, it does far more damage than that of Agony, than that of Unstable Affliction, or any of the other dots that are available for Destruction as well. And this playstyle also unlocks the real potential of a dot-based Affliction Warlock making a return in a big way in this expansion. Plus, the ability of Wither also scales off of every other talent that buffs Immolation, that buffs Corruption, so you can really optimize to make this ability do the most amount of damage. From there on, we have talents that can upgrade it further, like Blackened Soul, which is another half of the Wither gameplay. Spending Soul Shards further corrupts enemies afflicted by Wither, increasing Wither's stack count by 1. And each time Wither increases its own stacks, has a chance to become acute, which causes it to start burning up these stacks to deal Shadow Flame damage to that target. And Wither will always be acute, burning up all those extra stacks once it reaches 8 stacks or when its host reaches below 20% health, which gives it some execute potential. From there on, we have a bunch of other powerful talents that empower your gameplay, like Fire Critical Strike chance and Shadow Critical Strike chance being increased with Zalan's Cruelty. We have Shadow damage increase and Fire damage increase with Zalan's Ferocity. With Mark of Xavius, Agony or Wither for destruction are empowered by 20%, and the cooldown of Vile Taint or Cataclysm is reduced by a few seconds. With Mark of Parathorn, either Agony or Wither for destruction is going to deal its damage faster, and Blackened Soul deals 2% increased damage per stack of Wither. With Seeds of their Demise, Blackened Soul damage is increased by 30%. And with Blackened Soul deals damage, you have a chance to gain Tormented Crescendo. Though for destruction instead, you have a chance to gain the Ritual of Ruin. As for your capstone choice, you either have a way to modify your curses, which is a cool part of the Hellcaller, where Curse of Weakness becomes an empowered version, reducing enemies' attack speed by 20%, but also the cast time by 30% for 2 minutes. Or, while Unending Resolve is active, all enemies within 30 yards are afflicted by Curse of Tongues and Curse of Weakness at 100% effectiveness. In the middle, we have more talents to modify the damage of Wither, either having Wither do 50% more damage, but its duration is reduced by 25%, or Wither damage can be increased by 20%, and when Wither gains a stack from Blackened Soul, has a chance to gain another stack. Defensively, we have Zevrim's Resilience, where Dark Pact will now give you a heal for 2,500 every 1 second while it's active. Not a crazy big shield, since Warlocks have roughly 3 million health overall when scaled to level 80 with decent item level. Or we have Ilhoof's Design, where you sacrifice 10% of your maximum health, but Soul Leech now absorbs an additional 50% of your maximum health. And lastly, we have the big ability of Malevolence, which has a very interesting icon. It's a 1 minute cooldown where dark magic erupts from the caster, corrupting your soul for 20 seconds. This causes enemies suffering from Wither to instantly take a decent bit of Shadow Flame damage and increase the stack of all Withers that are active by 3. While corrupted, your active Withers are also guaranteed acute, blasting through those stacks in order to deal additional damage, and your overall haste is increased by 15%, and Chaos Bolts or Malefic Raptures grant you an additional stack of Wither. So for the most part, Hellcallers are going to end up being a very dot-heavy class, and while you have abilities such as Chaos Bolt or Malefic Rapture that do burst damage, you will primarily be focusing on using those abilities to ramp up those stacks of Wither, making it hit harder and harder, which is going to be the main focus of the Hellcaller. And with that being said, I guess the last question is, how does Hellcaller affect gameplay? So for Affliction Warlocks, it is the easiest one to answer. It essentially puts the dot fantasy, the damage over time, the dots, the corruptions, agonies, UAs, all of those, the fantasy of an Affliction Warlock that melts their enemy's soul from within, little by little, piece by piece. That fantasy is the prime focus here, as Hellcaller allows Affliction Warlocks to output some of the strongest damage over time abilities out there. Malefic Rapture will still be a key player in most PvE situations, especially since the main Malefic Rapture the primary ability that will deal single target but also AoE damage. But for the most part, Affliction Warlocks will be using the Malefic Rapture to empower the Withers, ramping up those stacks as quickly as possible, causing Wither to go into the acute state. Though you will see a good chunk of your damage being from Agony, UA, as well as Wither, which is the unholy trifecta that's going to be absolutely melting most enemies and bosses. Overall, I find the Hellcaller Hero Spec for Affliction in particular one of the most flavorful combinations ever, and it's single-handedly making me excited for the prospect of potentially playing an Affliction Warlock as a primary ult in the next expansion. Though while we are still talking about Affliction Warlock in the alpha without any of the damage tuning, and Hellcaller could potentially be ramped in the future, but if Hellcaller stays more or less as it is, and it's outputting the same damage that I've been able to see in logs so far just from running delves and dungeons, then I would be very, very excited about a damage over time focused Affliction Warlock as the Hellcaller in the future. But the question is also, how does this dot heavy playstyle affect Destruction, a Warlock spec that is so heavily focused around erupting damage out of their foes with massive Chaos Bolts? It's a spec that's focused on big bursts. How does a dot-based class weave into its playstyle? And essentially, Destruction Warlocks as Hellcallers are cosplaying as Affliction Warlocks because they too are going to have big focus on damage over time. And you know what? That playstyle surprisingly is working. The damage over time, especially if you fit into a bunch of talents such as Scalding Flames, which increases the damage of your Immolate, and you go with every other talent that buffs fire damage and Immolate damage in particular, the Dot of Wither could actually be quite an effective damage over time ability. And Chaos Bolt, while it still does a good chunk of your damage, will be used to ramp up the effectiveness of Wither, which is going to be a pretty high up their ability when it comes to your overall output. And surprisingly, it's actually competing against Chaos Bolt very closely. But Destruction Warlocks also have a couple of things they can do with this Wither Dot as well, and kind of to optimize this burst gameplay if you want to focus on burst rather than damage over time. With the talent of Internal Combustion, where Chaos Bolt can actually consume 5 seconds of your Immolate, that being Wither, in order to deal instant damage to the target. So when you're playing Wither as a Destruction Warlock, when you hit your enemy with a Chaos Bolt, you will actually deal a bit of decent damage with the Chaos Bolt on its own, and then additional fire damage from the Internal Combustion if it crits. Though the best way to describe the Hellcaller Warlock as Destruction, even though it is very heavy on the dot damage, it still has this aggressive playstyle that Destruction normally has. You'll just be aggressively refreshing the ability of Wither. But it's essentially a very violently strong dot in the way that it fits the chaotic Destruction Warlock gameplay, where your damage erupts on enemies out of nowhere, with your mastery just causing abilities to flare up. Wither ends up kind of fitting that surprising, eruptive, chaotic damage that is the theme of Destruction Warlock. And the way that you can weave Hellcaller Wither ability into your abilities and its interactions can actually be quite a bit of fun if that is the type of gameplay you're looking for. Though if you're a big fan of more passive-based gameplay, this is where we'll be talking about the Soul Harvester Warlocks. The flavor text for Soul Harvester reads, "Few grasp the power within souls, but many know the hunger demons share for the spirits of the fallen. By entering a pact with a demon, Soul Harvesters gain incredible abilities as long as the demon is fed." And both Affliction Warlocks and Destruction Warlocks both have playstyles that are synergetic with them being able to harvest souls out of their foes, whether it is Soul Drain as Affliction or the way you manipulate demonic souls as a demonology. A demonic entity now inhabits your soul, allowing you to detect if a soul shard has a succulent soul that has been generated. A succulent soul then empowers your next Hand of Gul'dan or your Malefic Rapture, reducing its soul shard cost by 1, summoning 1 additional wild imp for demonology, and unleashing your demonic soul to deal additional shadow damage. And that's going to be the primary bits of gameplay for your Soul Harvesters, is to unleash the demonic soul as often as possible. As for the other talents, we have Demoniac's Fervor, where demonic soul now deals 100% increased damage to the primary target of Hand of Gul'dan or to targets with unstable affliction. Then we have Necrolite Teachings, which buffs the base damage of your Shadow Bolt as either spec. And you also have some proc damage buffs for Nightfall as well as Power Siphon. With Soul Anathema, when you unleash a demonic soul, it now deals shadow damage over time, with the damage transferred into the new dot's duration, very similar to how Fire Mage's Mastery works, though this effect doesn't fully function on the alpha just yet. Next, we got a couple of choice nodes between Gore-Bound Fortitude, where you'll always gain the maximum benefit of Soul Burn whenever you consume a Hellstone, which increases your self-healing and increases maximum health by 20%. Or Friends in Dark Places, where Dark Pact now shields you for an additional 50% of the sacrificed health. On the right hand side, we have utility nodes with Eternal Servitude, where Fall Domination cooldown is reduced by 90 seconds. Or Spirited Away, which is a passive that changes Burning Rush, which no longer deals damage to you and increases your movement speed by an additional 30%. But Burning Rush now has a 60-second cooldown and lasts for 6 seconds, which gives you like a momentary sprint rather than a buff that you can prolong that consumes at your health. In the middle row, we have either Shared Fate, where when you kill a target, its tortured soul is flung into a nearby enemy for 3 seconds. This effect inflicts additional shadow damage to all enemies within 10 yards every 0.9 seconds, though this damage does have a soft cap of 8 targets. Or you can go with Feast of Souls, where whenever you kill a target, you have a chance to generate a soul shard that is guaranteed to be a succulent soul. Further down, we have talents such as Satiel's Ambition, where consuming Demonic Core or Nightfall causes your demon to lash out at your target. With the talent of Quietus, Soul Anathema Dot is empowered, and consuming Demonic Core or Nightfall now procs Shared Fate or Feast of Souls, whichever talent you decide to spec into. With Mantle of the Harvester, it buffs the value of Corruption as well as the damage of Wild Imps, and gives you more chances for Nightfall procs and Demonic Core procs as Demonology. Your final talent is going to be Shadow of Death, whereas Soul Rot or Summoning Up a Tyrant grants you Shadow of Death buff for a handful of seconds. During Shadow of Death, casting Soul Shard spenders like Hand of Gul'dan or Malefic Rapture always invokes you Demonic Soul to lash out at the target, doing 10% more damage, which gives you a very bursty proc-based playstyle that allows you to get the full benefits of the Soul Harvester gameplay. Speaking of gameplay, let's move on to how Demonology ends up playing around the Soul Harvester. And for the most part, I gotta say, this is probably the most passive version of a hero spec and how it functions with one of the class specs. As for Demonology, the Soul Harvester and the Demon Within is not really rotationally different. Sure, it gives you a handful of procs and makes you want to play around Power Siphon and maybe go into imp heavy gameplay and play around your Tyrant, but for the most part, it doesn't necessarily change your rotation in a major way. Your playstyle becomes a little bit more burst centric, which Demonology isn't really a stranger to. However, over the last few expansions, Demonology has become a little bit less locked into just bursting their targets, as they have a lot of passive builds that are just as viable. But this one is going to make you kind of readjust back into this bursty nature to fully harness the Soul Harvester gameplay. It's awesome if you enjoy Tyrant gameplay and if you like to have big burst damage windows as Demonology, but for the most part I found Soul Harvester to be fairly passive. It's effective, but it doesn't necessarily change the core of what is Demonology. Though for Affliction Warlocks, it is actually going to have a bit of an impact, especially if you're somebody who likes the basic Affliction of the last expansion from PvE content, especially if you like the idea of your dots not necessarily being the hardest hitting ability, but rather to use your dots to empower abilities such as Malefic Rapture. This playstyle basically gives you a lot more of a burstier profile placed around Malefic Rapture. Damage over time abilities are going to be there, but they're mostly used to empower the Rapture, which empowers your Demon, which gives you a much burstier profile, whether you're hitting one target or multiple targets at once. And it's going to offer a little bit more instantaneous damage, so as Affliction Warlock, you actually have some gameplay as well as adjustments that you can do with your overall profile. So it actually does create some gameplay and rotational changes, and so far I've been playing it around a little bit with a Shadow Bolt because of the Nightfall procs and the mobility that comes with it, but you can always play this as Drain Soul just fine. But there's actual notable changes that will come with playing a Soul Harvester and how you lean into your dots, where dots are empowering your abilities such as Shadow Bolt, Drain, or Rapture, instead of your dots being the forefront part of the output, which I think is actually a more preferable and a more enjoyable thing that I see out of Soul Harvester. Whereas for Demonology, it's very passive, it doesn't really change your gameplay. For Affliction, while it's not my favorite type of gameplay, with it being more bursty rather than damage over time and sustain focused, I do like the changes and rotational adjustments that Soul Harvester encourages you to make with its current setup. And with that being said, that's going to be everything we got so far behind all three Warlock hero specs in the War Within Alpha. Overall, I gotta say the Warlocks actually have some of the best hero specs that I've enjoyed thus far, at least when it comes to the sheer variety and gameplay aspects that all of them offer. Big fan of the Hellcaller in particular, and was surprised just how strong it is for destruction too, making him an actual damage over time class to some degree. And even Soul Harvester, which I was a little bit disappointed playing as Demonology just because it ended up being very passive compared to the other options you have access to. It does end up giving you a bit new gameplay as Affliction, which I did enjoy. But at the end of the day, I do want to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think about all of the three Warlock hero specs in the comments down below? Are there any playstyles that you're actually looking forward to, like a Hellcaller Affliction or a Diabolist Destruction Warlock, or potentially even a more passive version of Soul Harvester Demonology? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.